Welcome back. I was deep into this particular script when something in the second act stopped me completely. Not the confrontation, not the final phone call, but the quiet Tuesday morning when Marcus Hale submitted a single forensic audit report and made his wife's attorney go silent for 11 full seconds. That pause is worth understanding. You're watching his eternal diary.
The smell of crayon wax. That is what Marcus Hale would remember first. Years later, when people asked him to describe the life he had built inside that house. Not the square footage, not the address in the kind of neighborhood where the homeowners association sent passive-aggressive letters about garbage bin placement, not the furniture Diane had selected and then stopped caring about. The smell of Crayola crayons, the specific waxy heat of them when Leo pressed too hard on the paper, which he always did, because Leo did everything with more force than necessary, and Marcus had long suspected the boy inherited that quality from a father he would never meet. 47 Maple Crest Drive smelled like crayon wax on Sunday mornings. It also smelled like the cheap lavender dish soap Marcus bought because it was $3 cheaper per bottle than the brand Diane had stocked before she stopped coming home long enough to have preferences about dish soap. It smelled like the particular staleness of a house that was too large for one adult and one child, a house designed for dinner parties and overnight guests, and a woman who had decided, somewhere around Leo's 4th birthday, that the life she was supposed to be living was happening elsewhere. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter at 6:47 in the morning on a Wednesday in March, watching coffee drip into a pot he had owned for 9 years. And he thought about none of this consciously. He had long since passed the stage of active grief about his marriage. What he felt now, was standing in the kitchen of a house that was technically half his, watching a coffee maker he had bought the year before Leo started preschool, was something closer to a forensic awareness. He cataloged things. He noticed things. It was his professional affliction, the habit that had made him valuable to 3 separate law firms over the course of his career, and had made him, if he was being precise about it, the most dangerous man in any room where financial records were being discussed. He poured his coffee into a mug Leo had painted at the school art fair. The mug was slightly lopsided, the glaze uneven, and on one side Leo had painted a dog even though they did not own a dog, had never owned a dog because Diane was allergic, or had claimed to be allergic, though Marcus had begun to suspect that most of Diane's stated allergies were aesthetic rather than medical. He drank his coffee. He heard the sound of small feet on the stairs. Leo came into the kitchen the way he always did, slightly sideways, as though testing whether the room was safe before committing to full entry. He was 9 years old, and already cautious in the particular way of children who had learned that adults were not always where they said they would be. He had Diane's eyes, dark and slightly tilted at the outer corners, and the rest of his face belonged to nobody Marcus could identify, which was fine. The question of Leo's biological father had been settled in Marcus's mind approximately 5 minutes after the first time the boy had called him Dad, which had happened when Leo was 3.5, and Marcus had been tying his shoes, and Leo had simply looked up at him and said it the way children said things they considered already decided, without preamble or punctuation. Dad. Marcus had not corrected him. He had finished tying the shoes and then stood up and suggested they go get ice cream, and that had been that. "Is there cereal?" Leo said. It was not really a question. "Top shelf, left side," Marcus said. "The kind with the astronaut?" "The kind with the astronaut." Leo climbed onto the counter with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this since he was 4, retrieved the box, and dropped back down. Marcus watched him pour cereal into a bowl, watched him go to the refrigerator for milk. He watched the small frown of concentration on his face as he judged the appropriate amount of milk with the seriousness of a scientist. Leo ate cereal the way he approached most things, methodically, with occasional pauses to examine something that had caught his attention in the bowl, as though auditing the contents. Marcus's phone was on the counter. He did not look at it, but he was aware of it the way you were aware of a tooth that had started to ache. There would be a message from Diane. There was always a message from Diane, arriving at some point between midnight and 7 in the morning when she was in a different time zone, which was most of the time. The messages followed a pattern he had memorized without intending to. A photograph. Sometimes a sentence. The photograph was always of something spectacular. A beach in Bali, or the particular blue of the Mediterranean from a terrace restaurant, an airport lounge where the lighting was designed to make everything look slightly cinematic. The sentence, when there was one, was rarely addressed to him directly. It was more like a caption that had accidentally been sent to a person rather than an audience. He had 4.2 million followers on Instagram. That was Diane. Diane had 4.2 million followers who watched her move through the world as though the world was a hotel that had been staged specifically for her arrival. She had started the account 6 years ago as a travel blog, which had been, in retrospect, the first symptom of a condition Marcus had not known to diagnose. She had been good at it immediately. So she had the quality that made people want to watch other people live. A combination of beauty and apparent ease that made ordinary viewers feel invited into something rather than excluded from it. The account had grown. The account had, within 3 years, become the primary source of household income, which had been presented to Marcus as a triumph, and which he had accepted as one, because he had been raised by people who believed that a family adapting together was the same as a family thriving. He should have read that particular contract more carefully. The phone buzzed. He turned it over. A photograph of what appeared to be a rooftop in Dubai. Cool. The kind of rooftop that existed to demonstrate what rooftops could be if you removed all practical considerations and replaced them with infinity pools and ambient lighting and women in gold dresses standing at the edge of things. Diane was in the photograph, of course. She was always in the photographs, positioned with the practiced naturalness of someone who had learned to look spontaneous. The dress caught the light. She was laughing at something outside the frame. She looked like someone having the best night of her life. She had been in Dubai for 11 days. Before Dubai, she had been in the Maldives for 8 days, which had followed 4 days in Singapore, which had followed a brief return home that had lasted 60 hours, and during which she had slept until noon both days. George complained about the noise Leo made playing in the hallway, taken a meeting on her laptop in the bedroom with the door closed, and left before Marcus had gotten back from dropping Leo at school on the 3rd morning. He had come home to a note on the kitchen counter that said she had an opportunity that couldn't wait, and that she loved them both, and that she'd check in. She had checked in via photograph from a lounge in Heathrow 6 hours later. Marcus picked up his phone. He looked at the photograph for approximately 4 seconds. He set the phone back down and turned to Leo. "What time is the science project due?" "Thursday," Leo said, without looking up from his cereal. "Today is Wednesday." "I know. Do you have everything you need to finish it tonight?" Leo considered this with the careful honesty that Marcus had always appreciated in him. Some children defaulted to yes as a matter of reflex, a word deployed to end the line of questioning. Leo actually thought about it. "I need the poster board," he said, "and I think we're out of the good glue. I'll get it after I drop you off." "Okay." A pause. The spoon went around the bowl in a small, meditative circle. Is Mom in a different time zone again? The question was delivered with the neutrality of a child who had been carefully calibrating his relationship with disappointment for most of his conscious life. Not accusatory, not sad. Just a child performing a check on current reality. The way you checked the weather before deciding what to wear. Dubai, Marcus said. That's far. Very far. Okay. The spoon went around again. Can we have pasta tonight? The kind with the spinach in it? Sure. This was the texture of their mornings. It had been the texture of their mornings for 4 years. Before that, when Diane had still been physically present in the house with something approaching regularity, the mornings had been more complicated, full of the kind of domestic friction that requires at least 2 people to generate, the silent negotiations and small resentments that accumulate when a marriage is slowly converting itself into something else without notifying the participants. Marcus had thought, in those years, that the friction was the problem. He had thought, in the way people who were not yet paying attention thought, that if the friction went away, that the underlying thing would improve. The friction had gone away. Diane had gone away. And what remained was this: a 9-year-old boy asking for pasta, and a man who knew exactly how much the household account had been drained in the past 36 months, and was waiting, with the patience of someone who had spent a career waiting, for the correct moment. He had found the accounts 3 months ago. Not the main accounts. The main accounts he had always known about, had always had access to, because in the early years of the marriage, they had operated as a functional financial unit, and transparency had seemed not only sensible, but natural. Yet he had found the other ones. The accounts that existed at the intersection of business and personal spending in the particular way that required either deliberate obfuscation or a staggering indifference to being caught. Marcus suspected both. He had found them the way he found most things, through a detail that didn't add up. A tax document with a category error. An LLC registered in Delaware with a registered agent whose address he recognized because he had driven past it once on the way to a deposition in Wilmington and had noted it the way he noted all things, automatically, the information filing itself away without being requested. The LLC was called Driftwood Creative Group. It had been operational for 22 months. It had, in those 22 months, received transfers totaling $214,000 from accounts that were technically marital assets, the Instagram revenue that Diane had been depositing into a joint business account, and then immediately moving into Driftwood's operating account before Marcus could see it on the monthly statement. The trick was in the timing. The money moved within 48 hours of arrival, and the monthly statements reconciled in a way that showed the joint account as receiving the income and then paying legitimate business expenses, which it was, except that the expenses were being paid to a company that Diane alone controlled, which meant she was, in effect, paying herself from marital funds into a separate vehicle that her husband had no visibility into and no legal access to. It was, as a piece of financial architecture, reasonably elegant, not sophisticated enough to survive scrutiny, but designed not to attract scrutiny. Designed to be the kind of thing a husband who was not a financial forensics specialist would simply never find. Marcus had been a financial forensics specialist for 14 years. He had, in his career, untangled arrangements considerably more sophisticated than this. He had sat across tables from CFOs of publicly traded companies and watched them explain, with genuine confidence, why the numbers in front of him represented something other than what they obviously represented. He had a particular talent for stillness in those moments, for letting people finish their explanations, for saying very quietly something like, "I see," and then opening a second folder. He had not opened the second folder yet. What he was waiting for it to get thicker. He drove Leo to school. Leo ate the last of a granola bar in the passenger seat and asked whether sharks could smell a single drop of blood from a mile away. And Marcus said he believed the commonly cited figure was a quarter-mile. And Leo considered this and said that was still impressive, and Marcus agreed that it was still impressive. They pulled up to the school. Leo collected his backpack with the practiced efficiency of a commuter. He paused with the door open. "Are you picking me up?" he asked. "Am I always picking you up?" Leo appeared to consider whether this was a rhetorical question. He decided it was not. "Yes," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. Leo nodded, apparently satisfied by the confirmation of what he already knew, and got out of the car. Marcus watched him walk through the school's front entrance. Leo did not look back. He was not the kind of child who looked back. Marcus went to the office supply store and bought poster board and the good glue. Then he sat in the parking lot and called his attorney. Her name was Patricia Osei, and she had been representing him for 2 months, which was 1 month longer than he had known about Driftwood Creative Group, because he had started the process 1 month before he had all the information, which was not how he normally operated, but which had been, in this case, the strategically correct move. You engaged your attorney before you had everything, so that the work of building the case happened inside attorney-client privilege, and everything discovered after that first phone call existed inside a legal container that the other side could not open. The Q4 statements came in, he said. "I was going to call you," Patricia said. She had the voice of someone who had heard every version of every financial dispute that existed and had concluded, somewhere around year 8 of her practice, that the most useful thing she could offer her clients was calm. She was calm in the way that expensive things were calm, not because nothing was happening, but because everything was properly contained. The gap is larger than we projected. 26,000 in the quarter. 27 and change. There's also the flight records. Yes. He had obtained the flight records through a combination of his wife's publicly posted itineraries. She documented her travel obsessively. For the content and the business expense logs from the joint account. Diane had been charging first-class flights to the joint business account as content creation travel expenses, which they partially were, except that on 11 of the 43 flights in the past 18 months, there had been a second ticket purchased through a separate booking platform that was not charged to the joint account. The second tickets were consistent in class, route, and timing. They departed from the same cities on the same dates. They arrived at the same destinations. Someone had been traveling with Diane on 11 of those trips. Someone whose expenses Diane had been paying from the Driftwood account, which meant from marital assets, because Driftwood's operating capital was marital assets. "The discovery motion is ready," Patricia said. "I want to file it Friday." "Not yet." A pause. "Marcus?" "The Cayman account," he said. Another pause. This one had a different texture. "You found it?" "I found a reference to it, in a wire transfer memo from Driftwood's Q3 statement. The account number is partial. It's a receiving account notation, not a full routing string. But the format is consistent with a Class B trust registration in the Cayman Islands, which means she's moved the money at least 1 step further out. I need the full account details before we file." "How do you plan to get those?" "I don't need the account details themselves. I need proof of the transfer. The wire transfer memo is already in my possession. That's enough to trigger a foreign financial account disclosure requirement under FBAR. And if she has not filed that disclosure, which given the construction of this entire arrangement she almost certainly has not, that becomes a federal reporting violation. The discovery motion becomes much more powerful with that attachment." Patricia was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was recalibrating her understanding of how a case was going to proceed. He had given her that experience several times in the past 2 months. "You're going to enjoy this," she said, and it was not quite an accusation. "I'm going to do it correctly," Marcus said. "There's a difference." He went home. He put the poster board in the hall closet where Leo would find it. He made himself another cup of coffee with the mediocre machine and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and worked for 6 hours on 3 separate cases that had nothing to do with his wife. A billing at his standard rate, conducting himself with the precision and focus that had always been the organizing principle of his professional life. Around noon, he heated up the leftover soup from Tuesday. Around 2 in the afternoon, Diane sent him a voice message, which was unusual enough that he put down his work and listened to it. "Hey," she said. Her voice had the slightly distant quality of someone in a nice hotel room with good acoustic absorption. He could hear the air conditioning in the background. "I know I've been hard to reach. I just wanted to check in. How's Leo? Is he doing okay with that science project? Tell him I'm thinking about him." A pause. Then, "I'll be back in a few weeks. I have a brand deal shoot in Milan first, but after that I'm coming straight home. We should talk." He saved the voice message, and he forwarded it to Patricia with the subject line, "Wife's communication, unsolicited. Note the deliberate vagueness about return date." Patricia responded within 4 minutes. Saved to file. He went back to work. The science project was a poster about the water cycle, which Leo had decided to execute with a degree of detail that exceeded the assignment requirements by some margin, because Leo, when interested in something, was unable to produce a version of it that was merely adequate. He had drawn the evaporation and condensation diagrams with a level of anatomical specificity that Marcus suspected was going to confuse his teacher, and had included a footnote explaining the difference between condensation nuclei and ice nuclei that he had sourced from a library book. Marcus sat at the table across from him and worked while Leo glued and drew and occasionally asked questions about whether the arrows representing water molecules should have double or single points, and Marcus said whatever looks better to you, and Leo considered both options seriously before deciding on double. Because, he explained, a molecule moving through a phase transition should look like it has somewhere urgent to go. Marcus looked up from his laptop when Leo said this. He looked at this boy who was not biologically his. This 9-year-old who had decided that evaporating water molecules should look like they had somewhere urgent to go. And he felt something that he was not in the habit of examining directly because it was too large and too foundational, and examining it directly felt like testing the structural integrity of a load-bearing wall. "That's a good reason," Marcus said. Leo accepted the endorsement without apparent emotion, the way he accepted most things, Marcus said, with a kind of baseline trust that had no theater in it. He bent back over the poster board and added the double-pointed arrows. At 8:15, Marcus put Leo to bed. They went through the routine that had been their routine for 5 years. Leo brushed his teeth while Marcus stood in the doorway of the bathroom asking whether the back teeth were being done properly, which they usually weren't. And then Leo got into bed and Marcus sat on the edge of it, and they had the conversation they always had, which had no fixed agenda, but which covered whatever Leo had been thinking about that day. Tonight, it was the shark conversation again, redirected, because Leo had looked up the actual distance sharks could smell blood and had found a range of estimates that he found unsatisfying. "Why don't scientists agree on it?" Leo asked. "Because measuring what a shark can smell is harder than it sounds," Marcus said. "But they could do experiments." They could. Science is also about the experiments you have resources to run. Leo considered this. That seems like a limitation. Most things have limitations. A long pause. The particular quiet of a child who is working up to a question he has been holding for a while. Is Mom going to be home for my birthday? Leo's birthday was in 6 weeks. Marcus knew the answer. He had known the answer since he had looked at Diane's posted itinerary, which had her in Milan for the brand deal, then 3 days in Paris, then what appeared to be a long weekend in Morocco, with a group of other influencers whose accounts he had reviewed for financial forensics purposes that were entirely unrelated to his personal feelings about them. None of this placed her home in 6 weeks. I don't know yet, Marcus said. Okay. The particular flatness of that okay. Not wounded, just registering. What do you want to do for your birthday? Can we go to that aquarium? The one with the jellyfish room? Yes. Just us? Marcus looked at this boy in this bed, in this house that smelled like crayon wax and cheap lavender dish soap, and 9 years of a life that Marcus had assembled almost entirely alone. And he said, just us. Leo nodded. Okay, he said. And this okay was different. This one had the quality of something settled. Marcus turned off the light. He went downstairs and poured a modest amount of whiskey that he did not particularly want, and stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard, which was dark, which in daylight contained a basketball hoop they had put up 2 summers ago, and a section of the fence that needed replacing, and a bird bath that Diane had bought at a garden store and positioned with care, and then never looked at again. The bird bath was weathered now. It had the gray patina of something that had been left to the elements. There was a small crack along one side that Marcus had been meaning to repair for 2 years. He had been meaning to repair it the same way he had been meaning to address a lot of things. Thoughtfully, systematically, when the correct moment arrived. He thought about the wire transfer memo. The partial account number in the memo had a prefix he recognized. He had done enough international asset tracing work to know the format structures of common offshore holding jurisdictions. He had spent the previous weekend running the partial string against a database of known Cayman trust registration formats that he had licensed access to through his firm, and while he could not confirm the full account identity without the complete number. Yes, the probability that this was a Class B trust registered in a standard Cayman holding structure was high enough that he had begun treating it as confirmed for planning purposes. The total amount transferred through Driftwood in 22 months, less verifiable business expenses, was $167,000. If a portion of that had moved offshore, he needed to establish that chain before the discovery process began. Once the discovery motion was filed, Diane's attorneys, if she retained good ones, which he expected her to, would begin the process of characterizing every dollar as a legitimate business expense. They would produce documentation. Some of it would be real. The offshore account complicated everything because offshore accounts, by design, has created gaps in documentation trails that could be exploited defensively. He needed to establish the trail before the gap could be weaponized. He had one more step he needed to take before Patricia filed. He had been waiting on a source, a contact in a financial compliance firm that did business in the Cayman Islands, to confirm a detail about the beneficial ownership records of a trust registered in 2021 under a name he was not going to say aloud until he had the document in front of him. His contact had told him the document would be ready by the end of the month. The end of the month was in 9 days. He finished the whiskey. He washed the glass. He put it in the drying rack beside the mug Leo had painted with the lopsided dog. He checked the locks on the front door, which was a habit he had developed not from fear, but from the comfort of completing a known sequence. He went upstairs. He did not check Diane's Instagram. The document arrived on a Thursday, 8 days ahead of the month's end, because his contact was either efficient or had recently become less cautious about timelines, and Marcus was not in the position to question either. It was 23 pages. It was a beneficial ownership record for a trust called the Meridian Lakeshore Trust, registered in the Cayman Islands in March 2021, which was 7 months after Driftwood Creative Group had been registered in Delaware, which was 11 months before the first material transfer from the Driftwood account to an offshore wire destination appeared in the records Marcus had assembled. The beneficial owner of the Meridian Lakeshore Trust was a person named Daniel Achebe. Marcus read the name twice. He looked at the document for approximately 30 seconds without moving. Then he opened a browser and typed the name into the professional network search he used when he needed to understand someone quickly and thoroughly. Daniel Achebe, 34 years old. He maintained a profile that was sparse, but not conspicuously sparse. The sparseness of someone who operated in the background of visible industries rather than the studied absence of someone hiding. He had a production company. The production company was registered in California and appeared to do brand content production for mid to large social media clients. It had been operating since 2019, in 3 years of posted content on a professional network, and he had been tagged in the Instagram posts of 4 travel influencers. One of them was Diane. The tag was from a post 18 months ago. It was a photograph of a content production team on what appeared to be a beach in Bali, a group shot, loosely staged, the kind of thing posted to demonstrate the community of a creative ecosystem. Diane was in the center. Daniel Achebe was 2 people to her left. His hand was on the shoulder of the person between them, not on Diane, and the photograph was entirely explainable as a professional team photo, which was, Marcus recognized, precisely why it had been posted publicly. The 11 flights with the second ticket. He went back to the travel records. He cross-referenced the dates of those trips with what he could verify about Daniel Achebe's location, which was limited, but enough. The professional network showed check-ins, posts from clients that tagged him, a keynote appearance at a social media conference in Singapore that was dated 2 days after one of the 11 flights in question. Singapore was one of the destinations. The conference was consistent with a person flying commercial first class from Los Angeles on the date of the second ticket. He was, as he had been for the past 3 months, building a picture from available light. He did not have a confession. He did not need one. He was not building a personal case. He was building a financial case, which was the only kind of case that mattered at this stage, because the financial case would carry everything else. He called Patricia. "I have the beneficial ownership document," he said. She was quiet for exactly the right amount of time. "Send it." "I'm sending it now. The trust was registered March 2021. The beneficial owner is a third party, not a family member, not an advisor. He runs a production company. I believe he is the person who accompanied my wife on 11 of the 43 trips I documented." "Is there evidence of a personal relationship beyond the financial?" "Nothing documentary, but the financial relationship alone is sufficient for our purposes. The transfers from Driftwood to the offshore trust represent marital assets redirected to an account controlled by a third party. Whether the relationship was professional or personal doesn't change the financial exposure." "It changes the narrative," Patricia said. "The narrative is not my concern right now. The accounting is." "Marcus." She said his name in the tone she used when she felt he was being precisely correct, in a way that was not entirely healthy. "You've been at this for 3 months. How are you holding up?" He thought about this honestly, because Patricia deserved honesty, and because he had no patience for the alternative. "I'm fine," he said. "I'm better when I'm working. This is work I know how to do." "Okay." She accepted this. "I'm going to file the discovery motion Monday. with the FBAR disclosure issue attached. I want to flag the offshore account to the court before she has a chance to address it proactively. Agreed. There's one more thing. The custody arrangement. Yes. He had been thinking about how to say this part. He had been thinking about it for the full 3 months. Yes, returning to it periodically the way you returned to a calculation you wanted to check. Running it through every emotional variable he could identify to ensure that what he arrived at was not revenge dressed as strategy, but actual strategy that happened to be the right thing. I want primary physical custody with liberal visitation, he said, based on documented parental absence. She has spent fewer than 90 days in the state in the past 12 months. I have documented school attendance records, medical appointment records, extracurricular activity records for the past 3 years. The pattern of absence is continuous and substantial. Leo is not your biological child, Patricia said. It was not a judgment. It was a legal fact that required management. I'm aware. She could use that. She could try. 3 years of documented sole caretaking establishes psychological parentage under the family code. The school records list me as primary contact. His pediatrician, his dentist, his emergency contacts. Every institutional record shows me as the de facto parent. There are 7 years of that. I've been his father in every functional sense since he was 3 years old. I know that, Patricia said. I just want you to know she can make it painful even if she ultimately loses the argument. I know she can make it painful. He paused. I'm prepared for that. He was. He had been preparing for it the way he prepared for all things, by making sure that when the pain arrived, he had already done everything in his power to ensure it was his opponent's last available weapon. The week before he moved out, Marcus took inventory, and he did this literally. He walked through the house with a notepad and documented room by room the contents. This was not as unusual as it might have seemed to someone unfamiliar with divorce litigation. Asset documentation was standard. What was perhaps unusual was the care with which he separated the categories. What had come into the marriage as his, what had been purchased with joint funds, what had been purchased with driftwood revenue, and what fell into the ambiguous territory of gifts and accumulations that would require negotiation. He had been thinking about this division for months, and had done the documentation work over the course of several weekends when Leo was at a birthday party or a playdate, methodically photographing and cataloging with the same systematic attention he brought to financial discovery. As the house itself was complicated, they had purchased it 6 years ago with a down payment drawn from a combination of Marcus's savings, money he had accumulated before the marriage, and revenue from Diane's account. The mortgage was in both names. The complication was the appreciation. The house had appreciated significantly over 6 years in a market that had been unreasonably kind to property owners in their zip code, and the question of who was entitled to what portion of that appreciation was exactly the kind of question that made family law attorneys' retainers feel like fair value for service rendered. Marcus had a real estate attorney reviewing the property valuation alongside Patricia. The preliminary assessment was that his pre-marital contribution to the down payment, it combined with the fact that he had made every mortgage payment over the past 18 months, the period during which Diane's financial activity had shifted to the parallel accounts, established a strong argument for a disproportionate division of equity in his favor. He was not doing any of this out of greed. He needed the equity to provide stability for Leo, whose educational and housing continuity was the functional North Star of every financial decision Marcus was making. He needed Leo to stay in the same school. He needed Leo to be able to go to the aquarium with the jellyfish room on his birthday. What he needed Leo to keep the basketball hoop and the backyard with the cracked bird bath and the bedroom he had spent one afternoon painting a specific shade of green that Leo had chosen from a hardware store paint chip, with the authority of a person who had given the matter considerable advance thought. He moved Leo's things into his mother's house on a Friday night. His mother lived 35 minutes away, and had been briefed on the situation with the careful completeness Marcus brought to all disclosures that required someone to understand the full picture without editorializing. His mother had listened. She had asked 3 questions, all of them practical. She had said she had room for both of them for as long as necessary, and she had made the particular face she made when she was registering deep emotion while choosing not to express it in the moment, which was the face Marcus had apparently inherited along with the rest of his forensic habits. He did not tell Leo they were moving temporarily. He told Leo they were spending some time at Grandma's house because Grandma had been asking for company, and because Grandma had better weekend pancake output than their kitchen at Maplerest Drive, which was true. Leo had greeted this information with the equanimity he brought to most logistical changes in his life, which was the equanimity of a child who had learned that the stable elements of his world were not addresses or bedrooms or the proximity of certain furniture, but the continued presence of one specific adult, and that adult was going to be at Grandma's house, and therefore Grandma's house was fine. Marcus came back to Maplerest Drive on Saturday morning to finish his portion of the move. He took the things that were his. He took the furniture from his home office, which he had bought before the marriage. He took the records and the books and the specific kitchen items that had been his before the marriage and that he had quietly inventoried 2 weeks earlier. He left the house clean, which was more than he had to do, but which was the kind of thing he did regardless of whether there was a strategic advantage to it. But he left nothing that belonged to him. He took nothing that did not. He set his keys on the kitchen counter. He stood in the kitchen for approximately 45 seconds. The coffee maker was still there. The crayon smell was faint now, a ghost of the Sundays that had composed 6 years of his life in this house. The bird bath was still in the backyard. The crack in the fence was still there. The house looked exactly the way it always had, except that the particular weight of a life being lived inside it had been carefully, systematically removed. He walked out the front door. He did not look back. He had not taught Leo to look back, and he was not going to practice what he had not preached. Diane landed at JFK on a Tuesday. She had been traveling for 31 days. He knew this because he knew the itinerary. One had known it from the posted content, had cross-referenced it against the travel expense records, had documented it the way he documented everything. He knew she had been in Dubai, then Milan, the brand deal shoot that she had mentioned in the voice message, then 3 days in Paris and the long weekend in Morocco, and then, apparently, a spontaneous extension through Barcelona that had added 9 days to the original timeline and had been documented primarily through a series of Instagram posts featuring someone else's yacht and the particular blue of the Mediterranean that seemed to follow Diane everywhere she went with the constancy of a cinematographer who loved her. He knew she had landed at JFK because she had posted a photograph from the airport, the obligatory return post, and the one that performed the concept of homecoming for an audience while treating the actual home as incidental to the narrative. She was sitting in the arrivals area in the kind of effortless travel outfit that was the product of considerable effort. She had her roller bag and her oversized carry-on, and the particular expression of someone who had been away long enough that returning felt like an event worth documenting. The caption said something about being grateful for adventures, and also for home, which Marcus read twice and then closed the app, because he had stopped reading her captions the way you stop touching a bruise after a certain point, not because it doesn't hurt, but because the information is redundant. She would have taken a car service from the airport. She would have arrived at Maplerest Drive in the late afternoon. But given the flight time and the drive from JFK, the traffic would have been significant. She would have been tired from the flight in the way that people who fly first class were tired from flights, which was different from the tiredness of most people, but was still tiredness, and she would have been ready for the specific comfort of her own home. The familiar smell of it, the bed, the kitchen, the ordinary domestic architecture of a life she inhabited at intervals while Marcus maintained it continuously. She would have put her key in the lock. She would have opened the front door. He had not told her. He had filed the divorce petition on the Thursday before he moved out. Patricia had filed it through the court, and a copy had been sent via certified mail to Diane's last known U.S. address, which was 47 Maplerest Drive, and a copy had been sent via email to the address she used for business correspondence, and both of those things had been done in the correct procedural sequence so that proper notice was indisputably established. He was not hiding. He had not snuck out. He had followed every legal requirement. He had also not called her and said, "By the way, I filed for divorce and moved out, and your son is at my mother's house, and the life you were periodically orbiting will not be in its usual position when you land at JFK." He was sitting in his mother's living room when the first call came in. Leo was at the kitchen table doing homework. His mother was watching something in the other room with the volume at the reasonable level she had always maintained in the same way she maintained everything. Calibrated, considered. Marcus's phone rang, and he looked at it. He let it ring. She called 4 times in the first 30 minutes. He did not answer. He texted after the 4th call. "I am with Leo. We are fine. You have been served. Please contact your attorney." The response came in approximately 90 seconds, which was either very fast typing or a message that had been composing itself under the pressure of whatever she had found when she opened the door of the empty house. The message was long. It was emotional. It was the kind of message that people sent when they were standing in a house that had been thoughtfully evacuated, surrounded by evidence of a life that had continued without them in their absence, and had now been deliberately concluded. And the shock of that was producing a kind of verbal acceleration, and a rush of words that was trying to outrun what the words could not actually address. He read it once. He typed, "Please contact your attorney." He put the phone face down on the table. From the kitchen, Leo's voice. "Dad, how do you spell peninsula?" Marcus spelled it for him. Leo thanked him with the casual efficiency of a child requesting a tool from a toolbox, and then returning to work. Marcus's mother appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea. She put one in front of Marcus without comment, which was exactly right, and took her tea back to her chair, and the evening continued in the way that evenings continued, through homework and dinner and the television his mother watched, and the cup of tea that went cold on the table, because Marcus did not drink it. And looking at the ceiling of his childhood home in the dark after Leo had gone to bed and the house had quieted. He thought about Diane standing in that kitchen. He thought about her seeing the empty counter where his coffee maker used to be, the missing items she would catalog, the way he had cataloged them in the inventory. Or no, she would not catalog them the way he had. She would not notice them in that order or with that precision. She would notice them in the way you noticed the absence of something you had treated as permanent, with a sudden awful specificity, the way you noticed a tooth that was gone when your tongue found the empty space. He thought about how it would feel, standing in that house. The quiet of it. The particular quality of empty rooms that had recently been full. He thought about it. Then he set it aside, at the way he set aside all the things he could not use, all the information that belonged to the emotional register rather than the strategic one. He was not done. He had things left to do, and doing them correctly required the full use of his faculties, not the fractured half-attention of a man who was also processing grief, which was what this was underneath everything. The grief of having believed for years that the structure of your life was different from what it actually was. He had processed it. He had been processing it for 3 months, in the quiet way of someone who had always moved their largest feelings through action rather than expression. Every document he had compiled had been, in some parallel register, a working through, and to every entry in the forensic file had been both a legal instrument and a private accounting of what had been taken from him in ways that the law could address and ways that it could not. He was done processing it, as much as you were ever done. He had what he needed. The discovery process began the following week. Diane retained an attorney named Harrison Fleck, who was experienced and who Marcus, upon reviewing his professional history, judged to be the kind of attorney who was very good at the interpersonal performance of the law. The depositions, the courtroom, the strategic deployment of sympathy, and less experienced with the specific subspecialty of forensic financial litigation, which was, from Marcus's perspective, a fortunate mismatch. Harrison Fleck sent a letter through Patricia asserting that the divorce petition had been filed improperly, that there had been insufficient notice, that Marcus had engaged in parental alienation by removing a child from his primary residence without the other parent's consent, and that Diane would be seeking emergency custody relief. Patricia responded within 24 hours. The response was 31 pages. It included the certified mail tracking confirmation showing delivery of the divorce petition 8 days before Diane's return. It included the email confirmation showing the petition had been opened from an IP address in Barcelona on the day of its arrival. It included 3 years of school records listing Marcus as primary and sole contact, 3 years of medical records showing the same, more emergency contact documentation from 6 institutions, and a declaration from Leo's teacher, a woman named Mrs. Carver, who had known Marcus and Leo since Leo's first week of 3rd grade, and who had agreed, with no apparent hesitation, to attest to the pattern of parental presence she had observed over 2 school years. It also included a preliminary summary of the forensic financial findings, which Patricia had labeled Exhibit A through Exhibit F. Harrison Fleck did not respond for 5 days. Marcus imagined those 5 days as the sound of someone reading documents carefully and then going very quiet. When the response came, it did not address the custody emergency motion. It addressed the financial exhibits in a letter that was, Marcus noted, noticeably shorter and more careful in its language than the first one. It suggested that the transfers to Driftwood Creative Group represented legitimate business practices under the LLC operating agreement, and that any interpretation suggesting marital asset dissipation was a mischaracterization of standard creative industry financial structures. Marcus read this letter at his desk in his mother's guest room, which he had converted into a functional workspace within 48 hours of arriving, because the alternative was to not work, which was not an option. He noted 3 specific phrases in the letter that were legally imprecise in ways that would not survive a deposition. He sent Patricia a voice memo that was 11 minutes long and contained, in order, a summary of the phrases, an explanation of why each was imprecise, and a suggested line of questions for the financial deposition that would be necessary once discovery was underway. Patricia's response was, "Are you billing me for this?" He typed back, "No. Do the questions." The financial deposition was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the interval, Marcus did 2 things that were not directly related to the litigation, but which were, in his assessment, necessary to the larger project of building a life that was structurally sound rather than merely resolved. The first was that he found an apartment, It was not in the same zip code as Maplerest Drive, which was intentional. Not distance for distance's sake, but the strategic reconfiguration of proximity. It was 11 minutes from Leo's school, which was the relevant variable. And it was a 2-bedroom unit in a building that was 7 years old and unremarkable in the way that adequate things were unremarkable, which was exactly what he needed. He was not interested in dramatic reinvention. He was interested in a bedroom for Leo that was Leo's, in an address that would appear on school forms and medical records, and the custody documentation that was going to need an address. He signed the lease on a Thursday. He moved in the following weekend with Leo, who assessed the space with the same methodical attention he brought to cereal bowls and phase transition diagrams. "Which room is mine?" Leo asked. "The one facing the courtyard." Leo went to look at it. He stood in the empty room for approximately 30 seconds. He came back. Is there going to be a window in that direction for morning light?" Marcus considered the room's orientation. "Northeast." "That's fine," Leo said. "I don't like waking up directly in sun." "I know," Marcus said. "Can we paint it green again?" "Yes." "The same green?" "I have the paint code." Leo nodded. "Okay," he said, and went to stand in the kitchen, evaluating the kitchen, because Leo evaluated every room he was expected to function in with the thoroughness of a city inspector. The second thing Marcus did in the interval was call Daniel Achebe. This was the one thing he had not told Patricia he was going to do, because Patricia would have told him not to do it, and she would have been correct from a strictly legal standpoint. He called from his personal number on a Tuesday afternoon while Leo was at school. And he called because he had decided, after considerable deliberation, that the person he was most interested in speaking to in this matter was not his wife, but the financial architect of the structure that had funneled marital assets offshore, and that speaking to that person directly, before the deposition process began, would tell him things that documents could not. The phone rang 4 times. He expected voicemail. "This is Daniel." The voice was unhurried, confident in the specific way of men who had been told they were talented and had elected to believe it. "My name is Marcus Hale," Marcus said. A pause. Not a long one. The pause of a person recalibrating quickly. "I know who you are." "I expect you do. I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because I want to give you an opportunity to understand your current position accurately before the discovery process makes that understanding very expensive. I have an attorney." "I'm sure you do. Your attorney is managing your exposure on the production company side, which is real exposure but manageable exposure, assuming cooperation. The Cayman Trust is different. The Meridian Lakeshore Trust received transfers from marital assets. That's not your attorney's problem yet, but it becomes your attorney's problem the moment I file the FBAR disclosure violation with the discovery motion, because at that point your name is in a federal court document as the beneficial owner of an account that received funds with a potentially fraudulent transfer history." Silence. The quality of it was different now. "I have the beneficial ownership record," Marcus said. "I have the wire transfer memo. I have the transfer dates. I have 3 pages of financial analysis that I will be happy to walk a federal court through. What I don't have is your cooperation." "What are you asking for?" "A complete accounting. Every transfer from Driftwood to the trust. The full account details. And a declaration drafted by your attorney and mine that confirms the source and path of the funds." "You want me to cooperate against her?" "I want the record to be complete. What you do with the information about your personal relationship with my wife is between you and your own conscience. The financial record is a separate matter." Another silence. This one lasted long enough that Marcus wondered, briefly, whether the man was going to simply end the call. And then, "Give me 48 hours. "You have 24, Marcus said. "The filing window closes Wednesday." He ended the call. He put his phone face up on the desk and looked at it. He felt the specific flatness of a person who has done a thing they knew they were going to do and found it less satisfying than they might have anticipated. Not because it had gone badly, but because the thing he actually wanted, which was a version of the past 7 years that had been different from the version that had actually occurred, was not available in any filing or deposition or declaration, and never would be. He made coffee. He worked until 3, so he picked up Leo. Leo had a permission slip for a field trip to a natural history museum and wanted to know whether the kind of sharks at the museum were the real skeletons or the plastic replicas. What Marcus said he did not know, but that either version would contain accurate information about the skeletal structure, and Leo said that wasn't the same as real, and Marcus agreed that it wasn't the same as real. Daniel Achebe's attorney contacted Patricia 19 hours later. The accounting, when it arrived 3 days after that, was complete. More complete, in some respects, than Marcus had been able to reconstruct independently. There were transfer records from 2 additional intermediate accounts that he had not been able to identify, which meant the total amount of marital assets that had flowed through the Driftwood to Meridian chain was not the $167,000 he had estimated, but $231,000. The additional $64,000 had moved through a payment processor account registered in Diane's business name that she had apparently stopped using after the first year, possibly because she had decided the additional layer was unnecessary, or possibly because Daniel had advised her it was, and in either case it was documented now. Patricia called him when she received the accounting. "I want you to understand," she said, "that this is a genuinely unusual outcome." "I know. The forensic picture you've built is... Marcus, most people who come to me with financial disputes in divorce proceedings bring me bank statements and screenshots. You have brought me a self-contained FBAR case. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. The steps were sequential." "The steps were sequential," she repeated, thus with the tone of someone appreciating understatement. "Harrison Fleck's office called me this morning. They want to discuss settlement terms. No settlement on custody. They're not leading with custody. They're leading with the financial. They want to know if you'll consider a financial resolution that avoids the federal disclosure component." He had expected this. "They'll drop the emergency custody motion." That wasn't explicitly stated. "Tell them it's the precondition for any financial conversation." A pause. "Done. What are your terms on the financials?" He had written them out the previous night on a yellow legal pad, which was not standard for him. He usually worked entirely in digital files, but which had felt necessary, the physical act of writing as a form of clarity. He went through them now. Patricia asked 2 questions, both technical, both smart. She said she would present the terms with a 48-hour window for response. He went back to work. 3 separate client files. A conference call with a law firm in Chicago about a corporate asset tracing matter that had been ongoing for 4 months. The specific focused attention of someone who needed the daily practice of solving problems to stay properly calibrated. Leo came home from school that day with the poster about the water cycle, which had received a grade that his teacher had accompanied with the written note. Exceptional detail. The footnote about nuclei was unexpected, in the best way. Leo showed Marcus the note with the particular expressionlessness he used to cover the pleasure of having done something well. Marcus read it. He handed it back. "What?" he said. "Put it on the fridge." Leo put it on the fridge. She said the arrows were unusual, Leo added. The double-pointed ones? Yeah. She said she'd never seen anyone draw them that way. Are you going to change them for the next project? Leo thought about it. No, he said. Good, Marcus said. Harrison Fleck's office responded in 36 hours. They accepted the terms. The emergency custody motion was withdrawn with prejudice. The financial settlement framework was accepted with 3 proposed modifications, 2 of which Marcus accepted, and 1 of which he declined in specific language that Patricia delivered with the diplomatic precision she had spent 20 years developing. The modification he declined was a non-disclosure provision that would have prevented him from discussing the driftwood structure in any public forum, which he declined not because he had any intention of discussing it publicly, but because accepting a non-disclosure as a term of settlement was a form of acknowledging that there was something worth disclosing, which gave the other side leverage in any subsequent dispute, and he was not in the business of handing leverage to people who had already demonstrated how they used it. The final settlement terms took 3 weeks to negotiate. He would not document every exchange here because the exchange was technical and the emotional content of each round was approximately the same. A controlled, methodical process of advancing positions and accepting or declining counterpositions. The work of 2 legal teams who understood that protracted litigation was expensive, and outcomes were, given the forensic documentation, reasonably predictable. The relevant outcomes were these: primary physical custody of Leo, with Diane having liberal visitation rights, defined as a schedule that would be established by a family court mediator within 60 days, with the baseline provision that Leo's primary residence was with Marcus, and that school enrollment and medical decisions were Marcus's to make. Diane's attorney had argued for joint decision-making. Marcus's position, supported by the 3 years of documentation showing him as sole decision-maker by operation of fact, was that joint decision-making required a pattern of joint participation that did not exist in the record. The mediator, when this was presented, concurred. The equity in 47 Maplerest Drive was divided 63-37 in Marcus's favor, reflecting his premarital contribution to the down payment and the disproportionate mortgage payment history of the final 18 months. Marcus did not retain the house. He had no desire to. The house was listed and sold within 6 weeks of the custody order being finalized, which was fast but not suspiciously fast given the market. His portion of the proceeds went into a custodial investment account structured for Leo's education and long-term stability, which Marcus had designed with a fee-only financial advisor over the course of 2 weeks, and which he was comfortable recommending to anyone in a similar position as a structurally sound vehicle for exactly this purpose. When the driftwood transfers were resolved through a clawback provision in the settlement, Diane would remit to Marcus a sum equal to 60% of the total transferred amount over a period of 30 months through automatic deductions from the joint business account, which remained technically operational until the remittance was complete. The Cayman Trust and its contents were subject to a separate resolution that Marcus declined to discuss in detail because it was between Diane and Daniel Achebe and whatever attorneys they chose to involve, and he had delivered the relevant documentation to the parties who needed it, and his involvement in that portion was complete. He did not pursue the FBAR violation filing. Patricia had been prepared to file it. He chose not to, not out of mercy. Not Southampton. In and out of precision. He had gotten what he needed from the threat of it, and escalating to a federal matter when the financial resolution had already been achieved was the kind of move that cost more than it recovered, not financially, but in the cognitive and temporal resources required to see it through. He was not interested in maximalism. He was interested in completeness. The apartment had been painted green, the specific shade Leo had chosen the first time. Leo had supervised the painting with the intensity he brought to most things, correcting Marcus twice on the evenness of the roller strokes in a way that was technically correct, and that Marcus therefore accepted rather than performing a reaction he did not feel. The room had morning light from the northeast window, which was sufficient without being aggressive. While Leo had arranged his bookshelf in a system that he had explained to Marcus in detail and which Marcus had listened to with attention, because the system was, when you understood it, genuinely logical. Science, history, and reference materials in decreasing order of consultation frequency, with the bottom shelf reserved for books he was in the middle of and did not want to reshelve until finished because reshelving mid-read interrupted the continuity of the reading relationship he had established with the physical object. He was 9 years old. He had a reading relationship with physical objects. Marcus sat in the kitchen of the apartment on a Sunday morning. It was smaller than the kitchen at Maplerest Drive, but it faced east and caught the early light in a way the old kitchen never had. And he had a new coffee maker, not a replacement for the old one, which he had left on the counter of the house, but something selected new, a decision that had taken him approximately 7 minutes in a store because he had identified what he wanted from the functionality specification rather than from nostalgia or habit. The coffee was better than it had been at Maplerest Drive, which he noted without particular sentiment. Things could be better. That was useful information. Leo came into the kitchen. He came in straight, not sideways. He had been coming in straight for about 3 weeks. Marcus had noticed the change and had not said anything about it. "Can we have the astronaut cereal?" Leo said. "Top shelf?" "On left side." "You always put it in the same place." "Yes." Leo retrieved the cereal with the confident reach of a person who knew exactly where things were. He poured it. He got the milk. He ate. Outside the kitchen window, the Sunday light was doing what Sunday light did, spreading itself slowly over whatever surfaces it found, the specific unhurried quality of morning light on a day with nowhere to be. Diane had been to the apartment twice, both times on visitation days that had been arranged through the mediator's schedule, both times coordinated in advance with the precision that legal agreements imposed on interactions that might otherwise be less precise. Yet she arrived on time and left on time, and was careful with Leo in the way that people were careful when they understood that the dynamic had changed, and that carefulness was now load-bearing rather than optional. Leo was careful back. They were careful with each other in the particular careful way of two people who loved each other and were working out what that looked like in a new configuration. Marcus was not present for the visits. He went to the library the first time and a coffee shop the second time and worked on client files and did not check his phone. He was there when she dropped Leo off. He opened the door. She handed Leo's backpack through. Their eyes met. She looked in those moments like someone standing on the outside of a window looking in at something she used to be inside of. And he did not say anything beyond the necessary logistics. He did not say, "I told you." He did not say, "You could have been here." He did not say any of the things that the accumulated weight of 7 years might have suggested he had the right to say. He said, "Thanks for getting him back on time," and he closed the door. He was not interested in the performance of those moments. He was not interested in punishing her with the fact of what she had lost, which was, he suspected, what a part of her was waiting for him to do, because people who had done what she had done were often still calibrated to the emotional register and expected the resolution to occur there, in the sharp words and the recriminations, and the final verdict delivered by a person who was owed one. He did not deliver it. not because he was above it, yet because delivering it would have required him to still be standing at that window, still looking at the space where she used to be. And he had moved away from that window. He was, with very specific attention, somewhere else. The aquarium with the jellyfish room was 22 minutes from the apartment. They went on a Saturday. Leo's birthday was a Tuesday, but the aquarium was not, in Marcus's assessment, a Tuesday activity. It required the unhurried quality of a Saturday, the permission to stay as long as the fish held your attention without the ambient pressure of a weekday schedule exerting itself. The aquarium was the kind of place that had been built sometime in the early 2000s and had been incrementally updated in the way public institutions updated, one room at a time, thus the new sections noticeably more modern in their light and signage than the original galleries, which had a late 90s quality to their tank structures and informational placards. Leo did not mind the dated sections. He moved through the aquarium with the systematic efficiency of someone who had a route in mind, pausing at specific tanks for specific reasons, and moving through others without stopping. Guided by an internal taxonomy that Marcus did not fully understand, but recognized as coherent. The jellyfish room was at the back of the building. It was the kind of exhibit designed to produce a specific effect. The tanks were backlit with shifting light, blue-violet, and the jellyfish moved through the illuminated water with the particular rhythm of something that had no skeleton and no hurry, and moving through its medium with an indifference to direction that looked, if you stood there long enough, like a form of grace. They were moon jellyfish, mostly, though there were 2 tanks of others, smaller and more geometrically complex. Leo stood in front of the main tank for 4 minutes without speaking, which was longer than he usually stood in front of anything. Marcus stood beside him. After 4 minutes, Leo said, "They don't have eyes." "No." "How do they find food?" "Tentacles are sensitive to chemical gradients. They move through areas of higher food concentration without needing to see the food." Leo considered this. "So they navigate by what's around them." "Something like that." Another minute of silence. Then, "That seems like it would be enough." "Sure, if you're good at reading what's around you." Marcus looked at this boy standing in the blue-violet light of the jellyfish room, 9 years old today, saying something that was either a child's genuine observation about marine biology or something larger that had made its way into the language of marine biology because that was the available vocabulary. He did not know which it was. He suspected Leo did not entirely know either. "Yes," Marcus said. "It seems like it would be." They stayed in the jellyfish room for 11 minutes. Then Leo said he wanted to see the sharks next, and Marcus said the sharks were in the east wing, and Leo was already moving. Marcus followed. Later, at dinner, a restaurant Leo had selected based on a combination of menu research he had conducted on Marcus's laptop the previous week, and a recommendation from a classmate whose food opinions he had identified as reliable, Leo ate with the focused satisfaction of a person who had spent a good day doing things that mattered to him. He ordered the same thing he had been going to order since he decided on the restaurant 2 days ago. He did not change his mind at the table the way some children did. He had made a decision based on available information, and he executed it. "I liked the jellyfish best," he said, about 3/4 through the meal. "I know. Better than the sharks?" "You tell me." Leo thought about it. "The sharks are more impressive," he said, "but the jellyfish are more interesting." "But impressive and interesting aren't the same thing." "No," Marcus said. "They're not." Leo went back to his food. The restaurant had the ambient sound of a Saturday dinner service. Other tables, the clink of utensils, the specific warmth of a room where people were eating well. The light in here was the ordinary incandescent warmth of a neighborhood restaurant that did not have a designer, and it fell on the table and on Leo's face the same way it fell on everything else in the room, without discrimination, which was the honest way light worked. Marcus drank his coffee. It was not bad coffee for a restaurant. He noted this without sentiment. He looked at Leo. He thought about 7 years. He thought about Sunday mornings with the smell of crayon wax. Why, he thought about the water cycle poster, and the double-pointed arrows, and the footnote about nuclei that a teacher had called unexpected in the best way. He thought about the specific green of the bedroom wall, chosen from a paint chip with the authority of someone who had given the matter advance thought. He thought about a boy who came into rooms sideways and had recently started coming in straight. He thought about a lopsided mug with a dog on it that he had brought from the old house because it was his, because he had drunk coffee from it 900 mornings, because its provenance was simple, and its meaning was not available in any account or document or legal filing, but was also not in question. He did not think about Diane. Not because the thought was unavailable, but because the thought was no longer load-bearing. She was in his life now in the specific, limited way that the settlement had defined, in the calendar windows and the pickup logistics, and the occasional email about Leo's school schedule that arrived in a register of studied neutrality that he matched in kind. She was the mother of his son. Not biological. Never biological. But that was a distinction that had required years to stop feeling complicated and had, at some indeterminate point in the past 3 months, simply ceased to be complicated. Leo called him Dad. Leo had been calling him Dad for 6 years. That was the document. That was the record that held. "Can we get dessert?" Leo asked. "It's your birthday." "That means yes?" "That means yes." Leo looked at the menu with the focus of the newly empowered. He considered 3 options with visible deliberation. He selected the chocolate lava cake, which Marcus could have predicted, because Leo, when given unconstrained choice, returned to chocolate with the loyalty of someone who had audited the alternatives and continued to arrive at the same conclusion. Marcus watched him eat it. The lava part ran when Leo cut into it, the dark interior spreading across the white plate. And Leo looked at this with the expression he wore when something met his expectations precisely, which was a small private satisfaction, the look of a person who had gathered available information and made a correct prediction. "Good?" Marcus said. "Yes," Leo said. Then, with the deliberateness of someone saying something that had been there for a while, looking for the right moment, "I think today was a good birthday." Marcus looked at him. "I think so too," he said. He called for the check. He left a tip that was more than the standard percentage, not performatively, but because the service had been attentive and consistent, and that warranted acknowledgement. He helped Leo with his jacket. They went out into the night air of the city in March, cold but clear, the kind of night where the sky above the buildings showed a few stars through the light pollution if you looked at the right angle, which Leo immediately did. "Orion," Leo said, finding the constellation with the automatic recognition of someone who had been told which one to look for and had looked for it on subsequent available nights until the recognition became instinctive. "Belts visible tonight," Marcus said. "All 3, Leo said. They walked to the car. Marcus unlocked it. Marcus unlocked. While Leo got in with the practiced motion of a person familiar with this particular vehicle's door weight and the height of the seat and the exact angle of the belt over the shoulder. He was buckled before Marcus had the key in the ignition. They drove home. The apartment was dark when they got back, except for the light Marcus had left on in the kitchen, the specific warm circle of it visible through the window from the parking area below. He had started leaving the kitchen light on when they went out at night. Not because he was afraid of the dark, but because coming home to a lit window had a quality he had decided was worth the small cost of the electricity. A lit window meant there was something to come back to. Leo was quiet on the stairs. The particular quiet of a child who was tired in the good way, at the comfortable exhaustion of a day that had required everything in the right proportions. He brushed his teeth. Marcus stood in the doorway of the bathroom. The back teeth were, as usual, insufficiently attended to. He said so. Leo improved the situation. They went through the end-of-day ritual. Marcus sat on the edge of the green-walled bed. "What are you thinking about?" Leo asked. He had started asking this in the past 3 weeks. Not the other way around, which was how the question usually ran. Marcus asking, Leo reporting. Leo asking Marcus. Marcus considered the honest answer. "I'm thinking about how much has changed in the past few months," he said, "and how most of it has changed in the right direction." Leo received this information with the solemn attention he gave to things he was filing for future consideration. "Do you think it will keep going in the right direction?" "I think we'll make it," Marcus said. Leo nodded, the deliberate nod of someone giving a formal endorsement. Then he said, "I already knew that," with the matter-of-fact authority of a person for whom the conclusion had been settled some time ago and who was mildly surprised to find it still in question. Marcus turned off the light. He went to his own room and sat in the chair by the window that faced the courtyard. The courtyard was dark, a few lit windows across the way, the ordinary quiet of a residential building at 9:30 on a Saturday night. He could hear, faintly, the sound of something. A television somewhere, the distant ambient noise of a city that did not stop. He did not feel lonely. He noted this with the same attention he brought to all relevant data points. But he did not feel lonely, which was different from how he had felt in the large, well-furnished, half-empty house on Maplerest Drive on the many evenings when Diane's absence had been the most present thing in the room. He thought about what Leo had said in the jellyfish room. They navigate by what's around them, if you're good at reading what's around you. He had been reading what was around him for a long time. The reading had not always produced pleasant information, but the information had been accurate, and he had used it accurately, and the work was done. He did not open his laptop. He did not check the client files. He sat in the chair in the small apartment with the northeast-facing bedroom down the hall and the kitchen with the east-facing window and the new coffee maker that made better coffee than the old one, and he did nothing for approximately 20 minutes, which was, in his experience, a very long time to do nothing, and which he had gotten better at only recently. Then he went to bed. In the morning, there would be cereal with the astronaut on the box, and the east-facing window would catch the first of the light. And Leo would come into the kitchen straight, not sideways, straight, and ask about something, the blood radius of sharks, or the phase transitions of water molecules, or the structural integrity of Orion's belt. And Marcus would have the answer, or they would find it together, and either way, the morning would have the quality of something that was being built correctly, assembled from accurate information, load-bearing where it needed to be. He closed his eyes. The apartment was quiet. Outside, somewhere down the street, a light was still on,